to the first presenter, Mr. Parthi Sankar from Anomaly.
Welcome everyone. I was actually at InfoSec, Europe's largest security conference 2 days ago. And I've been there for a number of years with whichever company that I work for, and I'm currently with Anomaly. I usually man the stand there, and I usually get time to walk around the conference to try and figure out what the theme is during that year. 3 years ago, the theme was very much machine learning, with the likes of Darktrace and other technologies like that coming out. 2 years ago, it was GDPR, understandably. This year, I was trying to figure out what the theme was, and it wasn't really that obvious. It wasn't a specific type of technology. But what I did notice was that there were more solutions out there in the detection space over the prevention space. So it was slightly ambiguous, but it was clear that the detection side of security is what's being promoted now. Even the traditional vendors that have a preventative solution were more marketing their detection capabilities, which sort of leads me on to Anomaly. So Anomaly is very much in the detection space. We're there to do threat intelligence, which I'm going to talk to you more about, but it might be wise for me to give a slight introduction about myself. So I've been in the cybersecurity industry for about 10 years now, and 16 years if you include information technology in general. And I cut my teeth with SIM, being in the SIM industry. And that was an interesting experience. And I feel threat intelligence is sort of now where SIM was 12 years ago. 12 years ago, SIM was being promoted, but most people didn't have one. And if we look ahead now, most companies will have a SIM of some sort. And SIMs are great. They're part of the Security Operations Centers team, but they do sometimes suffer from a lack of value. It's quite difficult to get true value out of them, though they're very good at compliance and getting organizations to centralize all your logs that are being generated. So threat intelligence is a natural evolution to help security operations centers become more effective and drive value from your existing tool sets. So that's how I naturally came into the field of threat intelligence and being part of Anomaly. I'm currently here with Robert Gerlach, who might want to say a few words to.
Hello everybody, I'm the colleague of Parthi. I'm the sales guy, and he's the solution consultant. If you have any questions, you can come later to us. Ask us. Okay, thanks.
Great. And now a little bit about Anomaly. Anomaly started off in 2013. So in this space, we're quite mature. We're also got the widest footprint amongst any vendors that provide a threat intelligence platform. We actually have 400 direct global customers, which is a lot more than any other threat intelligence platform vendor. But if you include all the organizations that touch our product through ISACs, which I'll talk about, and through the use of our tool, we're talking more about 4,000. So, which is good going, considering we started off about 6 years ago. And we believe we are sort of leading in the threat intelligence space, and I want to talk to you about it to really highlight the importance of it now. So the agenda for my presentation, I'll be talking about the state of threat detection, the best practices in threat intelligence, the concept of sharing intelligence and why that's very important, and different threat detection strategies and threat hunting. So what is threat intelligence? There's many ways to define it, but in my view, threat intelligence really is a decision support system. It's to help your organization understand what threat to deal with amongst the sort of deluge of threats being generated by all the different security solutions in your organization. And here's a good quote. Intelligence in general can be thought of as a complex process of understanding meaning in available information. And that's very, very pertinent because there's a ton of data out there, there's a ton of threat information which needs to be curated. And what you really want to find is the key threats which are important to your organization, the key threats that are trying to target your organization, which ultimately could lead to a breach. So it's very important for threat intelligence to have context. So looking at any indicator of compromise, a malicious IP, a domain, a file hash, a URL, an email, you need to know more than that it's malicious. You need to know the context behind it. So who does it belong to? Because then you'll know the motivations of the attacker, and you will then start to understand if you're truly at risk from this indicator of compromise that you might be seeing in your environment. You know, where is it located? What are the other associations? So if you see a domain interacting with one of your assets in your environment, and you're aware that this domain is malicious, and it does belong to a certain threat actor group that's motivated to actually attack an organization like yours, their footprint is to attack an organization like yours, it'd be very useful to know the other associations, the other tools they use, the file hashes they deliver from that domain. So then it's like shining a light, and knowing the full story, you're able to now look and be able to remediate in a much better fashion. So instead of just blocking access to that domain which you know is malicious, you now will be able to look for these file hashes which may have been delivered to your environment, and then also start blocking other domains associated with that one domain. So that's the power of intelligence. And if you think about it, intelligence is not really anything new. It's used in many spheres of life. The police use it to catch criminals. The military use it to have better defense. Even sports teams use it to understand their opponent, to be able to win the game. Even taking that analogy, a sports team will quite often study the opponent before the next game, because they will want to understand how to protect themselves from a goal being scored. So how to stop a threat. Is it through a set piece? Is it through key individuals? Is it when they bring the substitutes on? So when you have this information, then you have all the clues to be able to protect yourself better against that type of threat. So this translates through to cybersecurity. There's nothing new in this. The only difference is we're talking about information systems, and we're talking about threat actors in the cyberspace. Intelligence consumers, there are various teams that should get involved in the threat intelligence initiative. Obviously the executive team, because they're the ones that are going to formulate the budget, and without a budget you won't have a threat intelligence initiative. The SOC team traditionally is what adopts threat intelligence, because you can feed that threat intelligence into certain tools in your security operations centers, such as your SIM, your EDR solution, your next generation firewall, your IPS, and others. So they will normally be involved. Don't forget IT operations as well. IT operations is often siloed away from security and away from threat intelligence, but they're very much part of the picture, because if you think about the remediation that occurs from a security incident, it's the IT operations teams that will be dealing with it. So take an example. So there's a threat actor group which is relatively new called Red Squirrel, and the members of that group tend to be located in Eastern Europe, and they have a very specific mode of attack. And that mode of attack is a DNS technique, which is to poison the DNS cache, and ultimately what they're doing is setting up a mirror site and infecting vulnerable browsers to deliver malware into systems in order to be able to compromise it. And they use a variety of different techniques to do that. Some of you may have heard of MITRE, and those that haven't, MITRE is a classification of all the different techniques used by the adversaries. There's over 200. And each technique has a remediation strategy to it. And if we take the example of Red Squirrel, one of the attack techniques is to infect vulnerable browsers. And if I can quickly show you this. Here we go. So this is Red Squirrel. And we can see under the MITRE attack classifications, these are all the different attack methods. The ones highlighted are the ones that they tend to use. So you have one here called browser extensions, which is a relatively simple thing to remediate. And if we actually have a look at this, we can see the mitigation strategies to this. We can see the description of the attack, the browser extensions that can be affected, and how to sort of prevent this from happening. And the key thing here to realize is that it's the IT operations team that would be implementing the policy change and making sure that your browsers aren't vulnerable. So going back to the presentation. it's important to have the IT operations team involved in your security initiative. And that's just one example of why. The incident response team would also make very good use of threat intelligence as well. They're dealing with incidents, and quite often they're dealing with too many incidents to effectively deal with any one in good time. So they need a way of deciding which incident to deal with first and to prioritize. And this is where threat intelligence comes into play. It will help the IR team determine which is the biggest threat to them so that they can spend their time and resource dealing with that over something else which is less dangerous to the environment. Incident response teams often have a threat hunting function as well, and this is a very good strategy in also being able to protect your environment. So instead of waiting for the sort of real-time attack to occur, have a look for the clues in the past to be able to stop a breach from actually occurring. So look for the clues within your log sets by utilizing threat intelligence with your historical logs to look for the different parts of the kill chain. So there's an attack life cycle, sometimes called a kill chain, for a breach to occur. It can take a length of time. Quite often, marketing-wise, 200 days is used, but it really depends on the threat actor group behind the attack. It could be quite short. It could be a few weeks. It could take 2 years. But there's a length of time before a breach actually occurs. And there are a number of different stages before that breach occurs, from the reconnaissance stage, trying to figure out how to get into an environment, to infiltrating the environment, to doing lateral movement to find something worthy to steal, getting credentials, and the ultimate end stage is exfiltration or some sort of damage. So each of these stages leaves clues in your environment, and you may have missed it. So if you can threat hunt, so look back historically and look for these clues, you might come across an asset or more that is at one stage of the kill chain, and then therefore you can actually deal with it before it progresses to the actual breach moment where you have to deal with it in real time. So there's a report released by the Ponemon Institute that actually interviewed 1,000 security professionals amongst many different companies, primarily companies in the US and the UK, but they're a good indicator of where the industry is and what the industry thinks. And what they found was the two biggest types of threats were APT-based threats, advanced persistent threats, and high-value data theft. So if we're looking at the figures here, we can see that 57% of the respondents found APT-based threats to be the most worry. And that's no surprise, because advanced persistent threats are very advanced, very sophisticated, very difficult to deal with. And a higher percentage, 62% of them, found them very time-consuming to deal with. High-value data theft was also very high up there in terms of worry. Over half, 52%, were worrying about the theft of high-value data, and 55% finding it time-consuming to deal with. Phishing was also in that report as well. If I remember correctly, about 44% of the respondents found phishing attacks to be very worrisome, and around and interestingly, less so, 33% of them to be time-consuming. So even though people are worried about phishing, it doesn't seem to take as much time to deal with compared to APT-based attacks and high-value data theft. So the best practices for threat intelligence. So a lot of organizations don't already have a proper threat intelligence practice in place. So what do you need to do to make it successful? So if we go through each one, the first one is establish a formal and dedicated team to manage threat intelligence activities. So you need to have a robust team to be able to evaluate a threat intelligence solution to make sure it's right for your environment. So this obviously will involve having a member of the SOC team in there. You should also include someone from IT operations for the reasons I gave before. You need to have someone at a higher level executive because ultimately they're the ones that need to see the value in order to set a budget for this solution. And the more people you have involved, the better. I've been to many client sites where they are looking to acquire a threat intelligence solution. Most don't, but there were a few that actually include a project manager in that phase. And I actually advocate that, because then you can have a start and end to your evaluation phase and make sure there's no creep into other areas of security, and you can fully focus on threat intelligence. But the key point here is having a team, right? More than one individual. to look at a threat intelligence platform to see if it's right for your environment and if it's going to integrate well. The second point here, I would say, is probably the most important. You need to obtain a budget for it to be successful. Without a budget, nothing follows. And this is quite often very tricky when it comes to threat intelligence, because what we find is that there isn't yet a set budget for threat intelligence, whereas there might be for acquiring a SIM or a firewall or other technologies. It's sometimes the leftovers added together to try and acquire a threat intelligence solution. But because threat intelligence is the new frontier in tackling cybercrime, in making sure that you're more proactive in defending yourselves, it's something that needs to be seriously looked at. And the different ways to achieve this, you need to bring the visibility of threat intelligence to as high as you can up in the company, so they can see the value of this in order to be able to invest it and release more funding for it. Maybe also do an audit and review to see what solutions you have in place already. Quite often, companies will have multiple solutions doing the same thing. You can get rid of one, and that then releases some budget. Or maybe you have two solutions that have separate functions, but they have a shared module. They both do sandboxing, and you're paying for the sandboxing on both. Well, remove the sandboxing module cost on one, and therefore you release more budget. There are other ways, but you need to have a budget, because without that, it's very difficult to then go about acquiring a threat intelligence platform. Participate in threat intelligence sharing. This is very important as well. So the sharing of threat intelligence is sometimes the most useful. If you think about it, if a company is attacked, and whether it was successful or they stopped the attack, if they share that with other companies similar to them, those other companies can protect themselves. Adversaries will not just target one company. They will go after many, because they know some they will not be able to penetrate, and therefore they have to do a few in order to be able to penetrate one. So it's obviously a good idea to be aware of different threat entities and the infrastructure that are currently targeting other companies like yours. And similarly, if it happens to you, if you share it with other companies, they can make best use of it. An analogy would be, for example, your neighborhood, and you receive a report from the police saying a new spate of burglaries is happening. You listen to it. But if your neighbor or someone across the street was to tell you that someone attempted to burgle their house at a certain time of day from the back, you're going to really listen to it, because you think it's going to affect you, because it's so close in proximity, and you have more valid information. It's real. It's not sort of hearsay. It's real information being given to you. So now you're going to be more vigilant. You're going to protect yourself better. You're going to make sure that the back of your house is locked. If you have a camera in the house, you might point it towards the back. You're going to be more vigilant during those times. So it's the same concept with intelligence sharing between different companies as well. So participating in that is very important. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Know your adversaries. So go beyond knowing that a domain, an IP, a file hash, whatever the piece of infrastructure is malicious. Go beyond that. Know what the threat actor group is, so that you can see their motivations. Build and maintain deep integrations with existing security tools. So threat intelligence is very useful if it's integrated with your SOC, with your EDR solution, your IPS, your firewall. It makes their job better so that they can function more effectively. Take the example of a SIM. A SIM will correlate between incoming logs against external threat intelligence given to it, and it will tell you if anything in your environment is communicating to something which is malicious. That then allows you to go and investigate it and decide if it's something that needs to be remediated. So if we look again at the Ponemon Institute findings, we find interestingly that the percentage of the budget allocated for advanced detection, where threat intelligence lies, is going to increase in the next 12 months by about 5%. And the amount of funding for prevention is actually going to go down. It's still very high, but it's going to go down. So this gives you an indicator of where the industry is going, what a lot of the CISOs are sort of planning to do over the next 12 months. So it's good to be part of this curve, I would advocate. so that you can carry out threat hunting and do attack investigation, because what you're trying to do is stop the actual attack that's going to cause a real breach in your environment. And effective threat intelligence will really help you in that measure. They also found in this report that organizations that use threat intelligence aided detection were more effective in detecting actual threats that cause them harm. There was still a very high detection rate when no threat intelligence was used, but we're looking at about 40% versus over 70% effectiveness when threat intelligence is used. So who's doing this? Understanding your adversaries. I touched upon this before, and I think I will probably quickly show you something to illustrate this. So here's an example of a domain, sales.space2rent.com. It might have been seen in your environment, communicating one or more of your assets. You look at this in a threat intelligence platform like Anomaly, and you see that it has a high confidence, therefore very confident that it is malicious and it is an APT domain. We see the contextual information listed here on the left, and also in this Maltego style format. And I want to point your attention to this group, the adversary. So this domain belongs to the threat actor group. And if we look at this threat actor group, we can see some useful information, such as its motivations and its victim types. So if you see this in your environment and you are a company which is part of the civilian government or national defense, financial service, then you're going to take this more seriously. This gives you context. You can see information about this group. So this group never has a presence more than a month or two before the attacks. Thank you. Thank you for highlighting that. Great. Yeah. So, okay. So we're looking at this domain over here, sales.space2rent.com, and we're 100% confident that it is an active domain. And we see a lot of contextual information around it. For example, the vulnerability that it targets, what part of the kill chain it belongs to. But I want to highlight the fact that it belongs to this infrastructure, belongs to this threat actor group. So this is what threat intelligence provides. It provides you the context. And if we look at this threat actor group in more detail, we see that the victim types. So if you are one of these victim types, you're probably going to take this threat more seriously. This is where context is helping you with a risk-based decision on the threat that you're seeing. We see information about this group, and I've just highlighted one point here, that they're very quick in nature. So again, if you see this in your environment and you're deciding, should we deal with it, and then how quickly should we deal with it, you might want to deal with it quite quickly in this instance over here. We can see their tactics and we can see their tools. So now you can look for these tools in your environment because you've established that part of the infrastructure, the domain belonging to this threat actor group has successfully communicated to your environment. And you can look at the other associations as well, such as these file hashes. Okay? So that is the value of context. It gives you the full story. So you have different types of threat intelligence which can be provided. You have open source intelligence and you have paid threat intelligence, and both have their own value. But what we find with open source intelligence is that it has a lot of false positives. So there's no one to really curate the information. An IP, a domain, a file hash may have one point been malicious, but no longer is now. It's been recycled, it's been orphaned by the threat actor group. But quite often it'll still remain in the open source list. And if you're just relying on open source threat intelligence, you might be investigating alerts in your environment. You spend a lot of time and resource investigating this, and then what you find is that you've wasted your time and resource because actually it was a false positive. So paid threat intelligence definitely has value. I mean, it means that machine learning analysts can be used to actually curate the threat intelligence. There's more investment in what's being provided. And the good thing about having a threat intelligence platform is that, like Anomaly and others, is that we take all of this threat intelligence, open source and paid, wrap our arms around everything, curate that information, and make it available for organizations to basically Google any threat to see the context, and also offer it as a single feed into any of your security solutions, into your SIM, into your EDR, into your next generation firewall, so they can make use of it. So just to keep that in mind. And when it comes to intelligence, quality and quantity both matters. Quality, obviously, because then you have less false positives, you're more sure about the threat intelligence you're working with, but quantity is also important, because if you rely just on one feed, you're sort of restricted in the type of intelligence that they're providing, and not gaining a fuller picture of all the different type of threats out there. So the use of tips are on the rise. So in the Ponemon Institute report, where they interviewed 1,000 security professionals, surprisingly quite a high number of the high-performing organizations had some form of threat intelligence platform, nearly 70%. I was quite surprised to read that. And with the overall sample, there was just under 50%. So you can see that the industry is definitely going towards threat intelligence platform as being almost like a standard within organizations. Related back to the SIM 12 years ago, where the SIM industry was really expanding. There were difficulties in getting budget, in having people in an organization to evaluate. But look where it is now. And I see the same thing happening with threat intelligence platforms as well. So they're on the rise. And they're central to security stack as well. You will already have a SIM. You may have an IPS. You'll definitely have some sort of antivirus, next generation antivirus or EDR solution in place, a next generation firewall. And they can all make use of threat intelligence. A next generation firewall, you can feed it highly malicious, confident IPs and domains so that they can automatically block. You can look for really malicious file hashes in your environment using your next generation antivirus or EDR tool. Your SIM will be able to do real-time correlation against all of your log sets against threat intelligence data, and be able to alert you on any connections to harmful sites, harmful pieces of infrastructure. So threat intelligence is not siloed, and it really sort of integrates everything that you have already and brings up the return on investment and the value on those solutions. Sharing. So I talked about sharing before and the importance of it. And in the report, we found that the high-performing organizations shared a lot more than the rest. There was a 75% sharing rate. Now, I'm sure sharing happens to some level with a lot of organizations. It might be the monthly coffee meetings. It could be just through word of mouth. It could be sending emails to each other. But there's blind spots here, because if it's a monthly meeting, then you have to wait a month before you get information shared with you. If you send an email, it could be missed. A threat intelligence platform is great because it's a formal way of sharing information, which is in real time and in a standardized way. And it's very, very simple to do. An example of that, let me end the slideshow and come back to the platform. I click on this box over here, and it's a case of dropping in a file. It could be a report that's been created, or pasting in intelligence freehand, and then importing it, and it gets shared to any organizations which are subscribed to share to get the threat intelligence. It's important to note when sharing threat intelligence. When you use a threat intelligence platform, it's designed to do it in a way to make it anonymous and also maintain the confidentiality. So anyone having a piece of intelligence shared with them would just be information about the external threat, the external IP domain, the contextual information around it, but nothing about your organization, or even the fact that it's your organization that shared this external piece of information. So it's very safe in that manner, and that's the advantage of using a dedicated threat intelligence platform to be able to share like this. In a previous presentation, a poll was actually done, asking how large was the threat intelligence team amongst the audience. And not surprisingly, not many organizations had a lot of members in their threat intelligence team. The biggest category was actually just one person, and that includes one person that has multiple hats, that has multiple duties, not just focusing on threat intelligence. So obviously this is a challenge, but we see this will grow in time. Just like maybe 12 years ago, there wasn't really one in the environment, in an organization to manage a SIM or all those kind of functions. So this is kind of where we are at now. And obviously where you have more than 5 members dedicated to your threat intelligence team, these would tend to be the very large organizations that can afford to do so. So having a dedicated threat hunting team, we found there was a higher percentage with higher performing organizations amongst the 1,000+ security professionals that were interviewed by the Ponemon Institute, higher than less well-performing organizations. Another poll was actually carried out looking at the biggest obstacle, and it's no surprise the biggest factor was a lack of sufficient budget. So if there's one key takeaway I want you to take away from this presentation, is to really think about how a budget can be gained to be able to drive a threat intelligence function in your environment. Sharing, I talked about already, and just highlight the point that obviously a lot of organizations have concerns about sharing, but it can be done in a way which anonymizes the sharing and also protects the confidentiality and prevents any of your internal information being shared and only external information. So the benefits, as I mentioned before, it expands visibility into campaigns and actors. It takes advantage of different tool sets, and it can help surface target attacks. And one example of this would be that if you're being targeted by a specific domain and it belongs to a specific threat actor group, and you have another domain shared with you, that is something else that you can protect yourself against. And it could be that both domains belong to the same threat actor group, and you wouldn't be aware of this other domain unless it was actually shared with you. This is almost like a summary slide. So establish a formal dedicated team. That's very important, so that you can review threat intelligence platform to see if they're going to be viable for your environment. Allocate funding, because without that, then there'll be nothing to actually acquire. So that's something important to think about. Start sharing. The attackers collaborate with each other. No one threat group can carry out an attack on their own. They're collaborating with other threat groups, or they're using tool sets which have been developed elsewhere, taking it together and then creating an attack. The same thing with organizations. To be able to defend better, collaboration between each other is really, really going to help. Give back. Think about participating in an ISAC, an Information Sharing and Analysis Center. There are many around. In fact, there are many that use Anomaly as the threat intelligence platform to be able to share information between different members of the ISAC. So that's something that I would encourage. The whole point of ISACs is to bring companies together in the same vertical to get them to share information together and integrate, right? So use threat intelligence to stitch together all of your security solutions to drive up the value of how they function, effectively making them better at what they do. And what would you actually share when it comes to sharing threat intelligence? It would be details of the attack. It would be the context behind the different threats and any additional knowledge that you have on them. So security is a people problem, and indicators of compromise are simply evidence of bad behavior. So knowing the tactics behind your enemies is what's important and helps you make a risk-based decision on what threats you're going to deal with. And it enables the analyst within your organization to become more of a detective rather than a shifter of information. This slide over here effectively shows you the links. So you work with an IP, and it will be somehow related to some threat actor group, and it could well be part of a campaign, and it might be part of a TTP. And all of these stitched together helps you to do a proper investigation to then decide if you want to tackle any given threat and how to prioritize it. Detection helps answer the questions. When did this incident occur? How long have they been lurking? What other assets could have been compromised? Do you have the tools, techniques, and procedures to retrace their steps? It helps answer all these questions. And automation. So the good thing about a threat intelligence platform is it has a lot of automated features to be able to deal with a ton of different threat information, to curate it, condense it, to make it available to your different solutions that you might have in a SOC, and for your analysts to make sense of it as well. So that essentially you're working with risk-based alerts. Just want to quickly show you the usefulness of the threat hunting module within the system. So here, we have a threat hunting module. In our case, it's called Anomaly Enterprise. And what we're looking at is, so this system has the full set of threat intelligence, and it also has incoming logs that might be stored in your SIM or in a data lake. It will not be the full set of logs. It'll be the metadata from those logs. And it's designed to do matching, continual matching between all the threat intelligence we have, any new threat intelligence we have, against your effectively historical logs all the time. So if a new threat comes about and it's been seen historically in your environment, then this will show up. And what we're looking at here is at this IOC, this indicator of compromise. And it's based on a hotel chain, but it isn't because it has this extra S. So it's not the official hotel domain name. It's an IOC. And if we look at it, we see that some useful information. So we can see the who is information, who it's been registered by. If we look at the passive DNS, we can see the other IP addresses associated to this domain. And we can look in Anomaly Threat Stream to see other indicators which are related. We can do further detective work on this IOC. So if I was to look at this and run a whois, then I can see another domain associated to whoever registered the one that we were looking at. So this one was malicious, and we can see effectively the owner of it has also registered another domain. And if we run passive DNS, then what we're seeing is other IPs which have hosted these domains. And what's interesting here is that if I drag this, over here, we can see three IPs, this one, and this one, that have hosted this indicator of compromise that we were looking at before. And it has also hosted this one over here. Okay, so now we're seeing the links. We're starting to see the bigger picture, starting to see what else we can investigate in our environment. The good thing with a threat hunting solution like this is we can then run a search retrospective. And what we're going to essentially do over here is ask the system to look for any connections to any of those IOCs, both the domains, all the IPs, against our full log set historically. So this is what this search is going to do. That's very powerful if you think about it. It's basically saying, okay, I was interested in this indicator of compromise. Maybe it was shared to me by another organization. Now I found out the linkages, what other parts of the infrastructure, what other infrastructure is associated to this domain. And now let's look to see if there's any connections in my environment. Has anything in my environment communicated to this domain or anything else linked to it? So we would get a result like this, where we have a search on multiple IPs, on the registration information and the domains listed over here. We can also use a threat hunting detection tool like Anomaly Enterprise to be able to look holistically. So what we're looking here is at actor information. So we're looking at an actor called Red Squirrel, which I touched upon before. Now, if I click on this threat actor group, what's interesting is, as well as knowing some contextual information, such as it carries out ransomware and other things like that, we can see that in my environment, because don't forget, this is collecting the metadata from your log sets historically, there are over 600 matches, communications to infrastructure, threat infrastructure, belonging to Red Squirrel. And we can see all of these down here. So we can see, for example, the actual indicator, which belongs to this threat actor group, and my asset in my environment that has connected to that domain. We can look at this actor detail. We can look at this actor in more detail, and we can look at the MITRE attack category, which brings us back to something that I showed before and shows the different techniques used by this threat actor group. So it's one thing knowing what's happened in your environment, but it's a second thing understanding what you should be doing to mitigate that and how to resolve it. And finally, the integration with the SOC, right? So the power of integrating threat intelligence, really good threat intelligence with a security operations tool like a SIM. In this example, this happens to be a SIM called Splunk, which does real-time correlation, and it's taking in threat intelligence. When it does that, then you will have dashboards which are effectively showcasing alerts, such as this, which shows you connections to malicious entities from within your environment. So here we see, as something we were looking at before, sales-space-to-rent.com, which we know was 100% malicious, an APT domain, belongs to the threat actor group. And these are the different assets in my environment that have connected to this domain. So this is the effectiveness of actually integrating threat intelligence with your SIM. You can even have it so that you can live off your SIM. Some companies really want to live off their SIM and not have to migrate into another portal. So you can do that very simply as well, as we're looking at over here. If we look at an individual alert, we can see from a technical standpoint of view that a firewall has provided a log which contains information which says that this domain has been allowed through to this internal asset over certain ports, and that this domain is an APT domain, and that we are 100% confident that it is real, it's relevant, and it is an APT. And we have some of the contextual information shown here, such as which threat actor group. We were looking at Lazarus before, that it belongs to. We see a vulnerability that it targets, which means now the SOC analyst has can follow a playbook, make the recommendation to fix this vulnerability, and a lot more. So this is just an example of how threat intelligence can be viewed. It can be integrated with a security operations tool. You can use the threat hunting module to be able to look historically in time and shine a light in your environment, looking out for the clues, picking up on the kill chain activities before an actual breach occurs. And you can use it like a Google-like database as well, where you can do a search for any IOC you want to gather the full information about it. That's the end of my presentation. So happy to take any questions now or at any other point.
Thank you, Mr. Sankar, for your excellent presentation and for the explanation of what actually threat intelligence is and how it can be used for the benefit of protection and as end goal for better cyber resilience. Are there any questions at this time?
Hi, my name is Christian Poff. I'm from Telling Business Services. So, to use your, the name of your presentation, filling the gap with the thread feed. So, my question is, do we need one thread feed? Do we need 5? Do we need 10? What happens when we have 5 thread feeds? Do we fill the gap or do we make the gap wider?
That's a really, really good question. So that's the whole point of a threat intelligence platform, because with a threat intelligence platform, you can start off with the feeds that are provided. I can definitely talk about our platform, and there's a lot that come out of the box. And then you can add to that. An example of this is here. So there are a lot of different feeds which are listed in this. Can you see? Okay, yeah, a lot of different feeds which are listed over here, and you can start off with the base feeds which are provided, and there might be other feeds which might be relevant for your industry. And then they can be activated whenever you have the budget and the project to do so. I definitely think more is better, and also looking at the quality. But because everyone's got a restrained budget, it's good to work with the feeds which are provided out of the box, and then to maybe acquire a feed which has specific intelligence towards your industry. So, for example, if you're a bank, there will be feeds which are very specific towards dealing with threats and looking at threats which target the banking sector. So that would be a feed that you would want to think about acquiring, which you can do centrally through a threat intelligence platform. You don't have to go to that provider. Robert?
Can you scroll a little bit and name some feeds?
Yeah, so for example, some of the useful ones are, well, not useful ones, but the ones that we sometimes see clients already having a subscription to, which then they can bring into our platform, right? Or they acquire through our platform, would be like Group IB or Intel 471, that provide very sort of strategic information, which a lot of companies like. And I was speaking to someone yesterday, and they got Kaspersky, and if you have that feed, you can bring that in through our threat intelligence platform. So quality and quantity matters in both cases, but we've got to be realistic as well. You can't acquire all the different feeds, but whatever you can bring in. The main thing is to start off with the threat intelligence initiative, get on that journey. Think about getting a platform, take in the feeds which come with that platform, then start investigating which other commercial feeds would be useful for your environment, and acquire that through the platform so that it becomes available to you to integrate with your SOC tools, allows you to do lookups of threats which you think would be defined in those threat intelligence feeds. Does that answer your question? So we collect feeds from ISACs. So that's not going to show up in this App Store page, but we do take in feeds from ISACs. So ISACs will share intelligence with us. So that is another way we get information. So that's something that I can double check for you offhand to make sure that we do get it, but we definitely do get feeds from ISACs that choose to share information with us. We are actually a platform used by many ISACs around the world. I think there's, I can't give a number, but there's 30, 50 ISACs around the world. Some of them as large as having 4,000 members using Anomaly as the threat intelligence platform. And some of them will share threat intelligence with us, which then makes it available to our clients. Obviously, what they share is just external information. So you don't even know which company is sharing it. You got no clue about what asset's been infected. All you know is the external information, which is just what you need to know. Is that something that would be useful, do you think? The Swift-enabled threat intelligence? So in that case, that can also be fed into, I could hear you, but yeah, that can also be fed into our platform, right? So what you see on this page is not the full list, right? So we have a software development kit which allows us to gather threat intelligence from multiple different sources, even if you don't see it here. So the answer to the question is yes, effectively.
I actually have one more question. About the red squirrel, could you go back to the MITRE attack matrix? Because yeah, they're kind of new to me. And also, do you use your own naming conventions, similar to FireEye, CrowdStrike, and so on?
I see, yeah, okay, so when it comes to MITRE attack, so that's a framework, right? Yeah, you can find it, you can just Google it, and it's just a framework which defines over 200 different techniques and tactics, and we've integrated it into our system, right? So we can actually go from here into MITRE. If I click out, before I'd opened it in our system, but I have this open in ThreatStream, so it showed it in our system, but we can view it in MITRE itself. So this will now take us into mitre.org, and it tells you more about this actual technique, what it's about, how to mitigate it, examples and detection strategies as well. Yeah, and we standardize everything in our platform, right? So we collect threat intelligence from multiple different sources, lots of open source intelligence from FireEye, as you mentioned, Group IB, lots of others. So we standardize it, and that's one of the jobs of a threat intelligence platform, right? It's to collect threat intelligence from, a lot of different sources, right? And apart from curating it, so it makes it more actionable, it also puts it into a specific format so that, for example, when you're looking at any individual IOC, as we were looking at before, so, here we have a list of file hashes, but we can filter by different types. I'm just going to go for domain. So we'll look at domains, and if I just pick up any domain, then we can see it in this sort of format. We can see the confidence score, we can see the impact, we can see the different tags, we can see the IP address, we can see the ASN. So everything will be like this, and we can gather more information as well, seeing if it's associated to any actors, if it's part of any campaigns. We can have a look to see if it's certificate, and check other enrichments as well to gather more information. And everything will be presented in this type of format, and as you can see down here. So it's all sort of human readable.
Have other questions at this time, at least? No. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sankar, and please join us for the discussion or additional questions at the end of the session. So please. I would now like to invite Mr. Dimitar Yanevsky from Inbox with his presentation.
Hello, everybody. I would like to take the opportunity to be part of this conference and speak about a bit of different perspective on this topic. Let's say if we were talking about prevention, etc., I would like to talk a bit of the other part where people are facing backups, and especially into the small and medium enterprise into our country. So, as announced, my name is Dimitar Yanevsky, coming from BIAP, a company that provides services for hybrid cloud backup, especially for the small and medium companies into the region. Here with me are the other colleagues in the front row, which are part of the team. So, what happened to me is the title, and the question is this the right attitude in today's world where the cyber attacks are happening and everything is alarmingly at the rapid rate growing. It's a digital world, and why not taking it seriously when creating the backup plans? Here I'll tell you the story. Well, people, over time, they figure out that in order to be successful, in order to achieve something and to reach your goal, you need to have some kind of plan B. Let's say when we were traveling and preparing for the travel with a car, we know that we need to have a replacement tire in order to have a flat tire and then replace it and reach to the goal. Also, let's say when we go to some adventures or let's say jumping from an airplane, we know that we need to have the parachute in order to have a plan B. But when we come to the digital world, it's not that obvious that we need to have a plan B in order to continue and provide business continuity, which is the most important part when we are talking about business. And backup is one of those plan Bs. Well, in how we are explaining this situation to the customers, that you have the document, when you have it physically there, it's there, you can put it in the vault, and you can make a copy, and this is it. But into the digital world, everything is data, everything is virtual, and if you don't have a backup, then it's like you don't have it there. And you need to have, let's say, 2 backups in order to have a backup of the backup, which is the disaster recovery. It's an everyday thing happening to all, and some numbers are here coming from the PricewaterhouseCoopers. Unfortunately, we don't have it for our country, but we are planning to make some statistics. 43% of the companies facing the massive losing of data cannot recover, and they never recovered. 30% of the employees, they don't have a way how to recover their most important data. And here, the backup is one of the most used ways of providing data recovery and protection. Backup, as a term, is widely known into this segment when we are facing companies with 10 employees, with 5 employees, and they don't have an IT guy who is responsible for this part. But we are seeing quite interesting things on the market. Let's say one of the most common way of doing backup is through external hard drive. Usually they buy a hard drive, and they are copying the data there in the hard drive, and it's standing next to them, or they are putting into the vault, or etc. But it's a convenient way that nobody can seize your data, which is this way of thinking. But it's quite unsafe. Let's say we see that the hard drives can immediately stop, and they're losing the data, or somebody can steal it, or water can be put on the hard drive, and then you fail. Then it's the backup onto the same location, which is quite common. But when something happens on there in your office, you're losing everything. Syncing to a remote server, it's more advanced way of backup in this segment, and usually the companies are making a sync to the external server, which is in some basement or to another location at some of colleagues' office. But they're doing a simple sync of the files, and when they have some threat, they are also copying to the other location, and they are affected all. And when we are discussing with customers, we see that they have their explanations, their way of why they don't take this topic more serious. Most common is that I don't have money to buy an equipment, which in those cases it's true, but backup can be provided without buying equipment, investing it, and let's say taking it as a service. I don't have IT employees. This is also one of the explanations why they haven't purchased that sort of backup, which also we see as covering the gap when you have a company which provides you all-in-one solution. I don't trust. This is really a common explanation when we are facing with the companies in this segment especially. When you have big companies or discussing on the level of companies and enterprises which have IT department, this is not the case, and they have accepted these new technologies. But believe me, there is a reason why many companies don't put their data into the cloud. And I'm usually giving the example like, okay, when you're traveling, you are using Google Maps in order to reach some place. And those guys are usually afraid like somebody is watching me, where am I? Okay, it's up to you, but in this case you need to print the map and you need to go and see in which direction you need to move, which is, let's say, not using the technology in this day. And I have nothing to lose, everything is on paper, which can be to a certain level true, but we are living into the digital world where the digital data is rapidly increasing, and those companies are accepting the solutions but not providing the security out of it. I will share you some cases here where we're seen on the market. The one is with the external hard drive. The company is into the sector of providing food into the food industry, and they have some solution for the invoices. And they are quite advanced, which they took the action of having backup with the external hard drive, and they had both hard drive, and they were rotating it each week, and they were quite precise schedule when they were putting one of the backup onto the one location, and they're putting it into the vault. And on the next week, they're replacing one with another, and it's done with the external hard drives. And one day, an accident happened. I think there was some electricity failure, and they lost one of the backups. And they're going into another one. They're opening it, and the hard drive is empty. So nobody was monitoring what was copied on that hard drive. So you can imagine the situation where the company has lost, I think there were 3 years of data stored in that, or 5 years, my colleague is correcting me. And without providing a proper backup, they are losing 5 years of past work. The case number 2 is with the ransomware, where a ransomware happens and the company doesn't have enough money to pay for it. Usually companies are paying this fee. They're going to a certain website or the broker, etc. But this company particularly, they didn't have the money. And what they did, the owner said, okay, I don't have a choice. I will not pay you this amount of money, and my workers will copy paste, meaning enter the data which were needed manually from the sheets which they had on paper. So 3 months they were putting the data manually into the system in order to have it. And afterward, they're still when those 3 months passed, they were into the period of accepting the backup as a solution, but still not taking it for serious. They said, okay, 3 months. Anyhow, I pay for those workers, but it's not the right way to operate. And the third case is boom once, boom twice. The ransomware hit a company which is also in the field of food production, and they paid for it. They paid for it. At that level, the IT responsible person were discussing with the owner, let's say, this happened to us. It can happen again. And the owner said, no, no, no. It happened once. We paid for it. Now I don't have money for investment. And then the IT was persistent, but none of that happened. We had the presentation to discuss on how to help them with the backups. And he was still thinking, but since this first boom was 1 year ago, this, let's say, feeling, emotion, and stress was weighed, and he left the time to think of making the solution, the decision, and then again. So one after another time, a ransom hit, and they need to pay a big amount of money in order to proceed with this, and take the data, because this would stop their business, which is quite high. So here I'm saying that even though they make millions of revenue and also quite amount of profit, the attitude toward providing some security and backup, which let's say we see it as the last defense line into this security. If we were talking about some prevention and some intelligence there, which is, let's say, high-end, at the market, in this segment, we are really facing this kind of profile of people. It won't happen to me. Is this the rational decision? I would say no, and I want to share with you some of the ways on how do we make decisions. So lately there's books and studies that our brain works in a way that we have system 1 and system 2, which one of those systems is quite fast, and it's the emotional part, and then another part of the brain, which is the rational part. And if we think that we are making rational decisions, based on these studies, we are not. We are emotional beings, and our decisions have been done prior we notice it. So we make decision based on the emotional instinct inside of us, and then we are just confirming our decision done based on some facts, which is the conscious part, let's say, and the rational part. Imagine if you are buying a car and then you are comparing the cars. Let's say if you don't have this emotional thing inside of your when making decision, you will go towards infinite when comparing things. This car has better tires, this car has a better engine, this car has a nice line, but the interior inside this with this one is better. This one is 10 millimeters, this one is 15 millimeters, etc. You're going towards endless comparison of if you let the rational part make the decision. There has been some studies when a person with some problem in their head, this part of the brain, which is the emotional one, was damaged. They couldn't make decisions. So basically, I'm saying that we are emotional beings, and I want to say that we need to think in that way when we are presenting solutions and pursuing for them to be accepted. People do what's easy more than what's right. So here the point is that we cannot accept people to make things right. They're always going to the way that they make what's easy to them. So when designing solution, when designing or making some proposal, make the thing easy so they would do the thing right. This is one perspective that we need to take into consideration when we are making our solutions. And use empathy. Empathy is quite powerful because it plays with the emotions. We need to put into the perspective, into the shoes of the customer or the party which makes the decision, and we talk from that perspective. So in this way, the acceptance of what we want to achieve it's higher. We started with let's make backup for all. This was an idea that into the country. This year was not this year. This year was the first time when we celebrate the World's Backup Day, which is at the end of March. So we organized a conference by the name "Let's Make Backup for All," which was the idea to increase the awareness and the acceptance of backups. We had a couple of speakers who were discussing about the ransomware and the technology behind it, and also we were talking about the acceptance rate in this country, and it had a nice effect. So we are also planning to have it next year and to make some kind of tradition in order to increase the awareness and the level of education in this sector. So if we think that people have understood what is cybersecurity and what things they need to pay attention to or to take into consideration, I would say that we are not at that level if we take ourselves as example. So here we'll see how our journey ends into this world. Thank you very much. It was not a technical presentation. It was more about sharing what we are seeing on the market and ways how to make our solutions to be more accepted when we are presenting it. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Mr. Janeski, and also to the company BIAP for this presentation and for presenting the challenges and best practices regarding backups. There will be a slight change in the program. We'll move the last presentation from this session to the last session, to the sixth session, in order to keep up with the agenda. I would now like to ask you if there are some questions from the audience. No, so then I would like to thank
Okay.
the
If you have any question, we are
today.
here and we are
Yes, and I'm
available
sure
for
that-
discussion.
I'm sure that both speakers will be willing to answer questions during the coffee break. So now it's time for the coffee break, but for 30 minutes. But before we go on the break, just two short announcements. The first one is regarding your accommodation here. So if you're checking out from these two hotels today, please see with the reception about the end time for checkout. And the second one is regarding the